Good evening. My name is Dr. Alexandria Egler, and I am the Executive Director of Mission Ministry and Interfaith Dialogue here at St. Francis College. On behalf of this office, the Office of Advancement under the leadership of my colleague Thomas Flood, and of course the entire college community guided by President Miguel Martinez Sainz, it's wonderful to have you all join us as we begin our conversation on this 245th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. So to all of our Marines, a very, very happy birthday indeed, and thank you for all that you do in service to our country. Before we begin our program, I would like to welcome and invite Monsignor David Casado, the Vicar for Catholic Schools. We've just lost him, I just heard. And we were so close. Is he coming back, Thomas?
There he is. He's back.
It was your big moment, Monsignor. I was just about to introduce you. You're muted, but give me, all right, while we get you there.
I'm all right, I'm on you, unmuted.
Okay, so Monsignor David Casado, the Vicar for Catholic Schools for the Diocese of Brooklyn, the pastor of St. Athanasius Church in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and chaplain to the New York City Police Department. Would you please lead us in an opening prayer?
With great pleasure and with great confusion, but we're back here, we're online together. Just a few words. First of all, Pope Francis issued an encyclical the other day called Fratelli Tutti. And in that encyclical, St. Francis, who takes his name from the Saint Francis, issued this encyclical calling us all to a better understanding of each other, a coming together and a living together in love and in harmony and in understanding. So today, in the spirit of Pope Francis's encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, let us pray. Lord our God, we, your people, come together tonight on the eve of Veterans Day. We are indeed mindful of all those who have served this country in all different ways. During this year, 1920, we have been met with a pandemic, and it's indeed a terrible experience for all of us. But frontline people, first responders, have given themselves so generously. Today, we ask you, O Lord, as we gather here, that we may continue to do your holy work in this world, as it is with the words of St. Francis, make us instruments of your peace in this world. Where there is hatred, let us bring love. Where there is injury, let us bring healing. Where there is pain, let us bring help. We ask this, O Lord, for you are Lord today and forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Monsignor Casado.
Thank you.
I know you have a very busy schedule, but please stay as long as you are able to. So tonight's conversation grew out of a few touch points that are situated in the values of our Franciscan tradition. Each year at the college, we choose a different Franciscan value that our community can immerse itself in. This year, we thought it would be fitting to invite the community to consider service as a value. When we think about service through the lens of the Franciscan tradition, we are immediately drawn to our patron, St. Francis of Assisi, whose prayer Monsignor excerpted from earlier. St. Francis, in responding to an invitation from Jesus on the cross, reminded medieval Europe, and for the past 800 years, all of us, that living lives in service to others, particularly the marginalized and outcast, is what we are called to do. Francis did this along with his stalwart companion, Clare, a woman who forged a path unlike any other woman in medieval Europe. Together, they ignited what I like to call a revolution of love. This year has been one filled with service throughout our country and around the world. We think of our first responders, healthcare workers, teachers, transit employees, and all who have kept businesses open in service to their communities, along with our firefighters, police officers, and of course, our members of the armed forces. With this in mind, we felt it was important to recall and remember those great women and men who, until the end of their lives, remained true to their faith and their religious beliefs, dying in service to others. And tonight we will meet an example of this in the person of Father Vincent Capodanno, a native son of Staten Island. To bring us into a deeper understanding of Father Capodanno's life and vocation, I'm so happy to welcome this evening's guest, and I'll introduce each of them in a moment. But I'd like to also take this moment to thank our friends and colleagues at DeSales Media for so graciously agreeing to air The Field Afar a few times today on Net TV. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. Our panel is going to engage in conversation for approximately 45 minutes or so. And afterwards, or perhaps within the course of the conversation, we will take questions from you. If you have a question or a comment, I'd invite you to post it in the little Q&A box that it's available on your webinar screen. If you're having difficulty with that, just put it in the chat and we'll attempt to address as many of those as we're able. So tonight we have assembled a very wise, service-oriented, and impressively educated panel for you. And I will begin by introducing my very dear friend and colleague, Dr. Joel Warden. Dr. Warden holds a PhD in systematic theology from Fordham University, having previously earned degrees in theology from Oxford University and music performance from the State University of New York at Buffalo. He has considerable experience in teaching ethics, moral theology, and the personal significance of clinical practice to college undergrads, EMS personnel, medical students, and medical resident physicians. Currently, he is the Catholic Scholar in Residence here at St. Francis College, as well as an adjunct instructor in the Religious Studies and Philosophy Department. Dr. Warden also teaches at Fordham University and serves as the clinical ethics consultant at the Brooklyn Hospital Center in downtown Brooklyn. In all of these capacities, he has opportunities to think creatively and communally with others about important issues at the intersection of medical ethics, professional identity, and fundamental moral theology and healthcare justice. Our next guest is a native of Brooklyn, Father Mark Bristol, who received a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the Franciscan University of Steubenville in Steubenville, Ohio. He was commissioned an ensign in the Navy chaplain candidate program as well. He holds a pontifical bachelor's degree in sacred theology, a master's degree in divinity, and a master's degree in theology from St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, New York. Father Bristol is a Roman Catholic priest for the Diocese of Brooklyn and an active duty Navy chaplain. He is currently assigned to the USS Theodore Roosevelt as a staff chaplain and division officer. As a parish priest, Father Bristol served as the parochial vicar of St. Anastasia Parish in Douglaston, Queens. His personal awards include the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with 2 gold stars, and the Navy Good Conduct Medal. And finally, I am pleased to introduce another friend and colleague, Mr. Tim Moriarty, an Emmy-nominated writer, producer, and actor. He earned his BA and MA degrees in philosophy from Boston College and his MFA in acting from Louisiana State University. Tim spent 3 years as a Jesuit seminarian before pursuing a career in the arts. As an actor, he has appeared in episodes of The Blacklist, House of Cards, Luke Cage, and most recently, a reoccurring guest starring role on the NBC show Manifest. Some of you may recognize him as the host for Net TV's series Mysteries of the Church. Tim is also the founder and owner of the production company Castletown Media that specializes in documentaries. He is currently working as the executive producer on an 80-episode and counting series on the history of the Catholic Church in America entitled The Chair, coming to a streaming platform near you very soon. Tim's film, The Field Afar, The Life of Father Vincent Capodanno, was nominated last year for a New York Regional Emmy Award for Best Documentary. And apparently because he requires absolutely no sleep, in addition to his acting and production work, Tim is currently engaged in a psychoanalytic training program with the C.G. Jung Institute of New York. So it is my absolute honor to welcome Dr. Warden, Father Bristol, and Mr. Moriarty, three very accomplished and thoughtful individuals as our guests. So we're very much looking forward to the conversation. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks so much for those introductions, Alex, Dr. Egler. We're going to launch in, and while we queue up about a 2-minute segment of the Field of Afar, this documentary that is concerned with the life and the heroism of Father Capodanno, I've asked us to start in an odd place, and I'll get into that in a second. But in order to set the context for this, just if anyone has had the chance to see the documentary, that's great. This will be familiar to you. If you haven't had a chance, talking about this and seeing this brief excerpt might impel you to, it might make you very interested in order to do that. But just the briefest of chronological sketches about Father Capodanno's life. He was born in 1929 on Staten Island, graduated from high school in 1947, subsequently entered Maryknoll, was ordained a priest in 1958. In 1959, was sent on his first mission to Taiwan, eventually then sent on another mission to Hong Kong. In 1965, he was commissioned in the Navy Chaplain Corps and subsequently was sent to minister to Marine Corps units in Vietnam. On September 4th, 1967, he was killed while ministering on the battlefield in Vietnam. 1969 was posthumously given the Medal of Honor, and the language of the citation concerned with that mentions his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in his role of service. In 2002, the cause for his canonization opened in 2006. He was named Servant of God, which is one of the steps towards what we hope and pray would be eventual canonization, recognition as a saint of the Church. So that's the briefest of chronological frameworks for his life. In the 2-minute bit that we're going to watch right now, we are in a precarious moment in his life, a moment of great decision. And after we've watched it, I'd like to invite Tim in a number of questions to share with us, first at the beginning of this conversation, a few ideas and a few things about the work of a documentarist in gathering together the resources at his disposal to create this film. So Dr. Egler, if we're ready for the clip, that would be great.
That he would come home, somebody would make that connection. But
after 6 years in Taiwan, the bishop in charge of the region, Bishop Donaghy, transferred Father Vincent to teach English in Hong Kong, alongside his old friend, Father Chiang. Bishop Donaghy stated in his reasoning for the transfer,
I believe he finds life here difficult. He's a good, solid priest, but it's difficult to conceive him adopting the rough and ready attitude that certain phases of our work demands.
I know one thing, he was an Italian. Maryknoll was a very Irish establishment. And he was an outspoken individual. He felt a lot of the rules that they had were childish.
Father Vincent was deeply distressed by his transfer and wrote to Bishop Donaghy,
I cannot sit by and watch as that period of time is written off as a total loss. Those 6 years can at least be salvaged partially by arranging for the use of the experience acquired during them. In the tagline, I took a vow of obedience. I'll do what you want. But if I have any way that I can at least express my feeling or opinion or what I'd like to do, this would be it. But he never said, I'm not doing it.
his distress in regards to his present assignment had begun to affect his health. His doctor in Hong Kong noted with concern,
he gives a history of loss of appetite, weight loss of 10 pounds, sleeping badly, and increasing nervousness for the past month. I consider his condition to be anxiety state. due to problems and frustrations associated with his present assignment.
When he was transferred to Hong Kong, he felt that was a demotion. And here he was teaching English now. And not only that, but he had to learn another dialect.
I think he liked being out in the fields and the ruggedness. And at that point, that's where he heard about the need for Navy chaplains.
Father Giappa, and he talked about options, what was available to him.
We went out to a very nice restaurant.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Egler, for getting that for us. Tim, very shortly, I want to talk about this piece of Father Capodanno's biography, in how he's in the middle of a very difficult situation in his life. He's depressed, he's dissatisfied, he seems to be feeling at all odds, and this provides the scene for him to make the momentous decision of entering into the Navy Chaplain Corps, which of course is, leads to all these other things that he does. But before we get to that, I'm so fascinated because, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm not a documentarist. Usually in the past, when the Office of Mission and Ministry, when we've done a kind of viewing or discussion on a film or on a series, it's been fairly easy for us to pick a couple of scenes to watch together and then to talk about, because the scenes, in a movie sometimes or in a TV show are kind of slowly organized in a sort of arc of a story about, a character's life. But what I've noticed in watching your documentary a whole bunch of times and enjoying it every time is the complexity of materials that you've used in order to present to us the life of Father Capodanno. So you have contemporary interviews with family members and friends of his. You have historical footage that I guess isn't really connected to him specifically, but it comes from that particular era in the life of the church. You have, you also have footage of Capodanno himself in a number of places. You have had access to documents, probably pretty confidential documents that had to do with his life and his vocation, both within the military and with Maryknoll. And you layer those in constantly, like every couple of seconds, we're given access to a different piece of material that then becomes like this tapestry that is part of the larger narrative of his life. Would you, just purely as a documentarist, would you talk a little bit about the challenges of, or the excitement that's attached to having the need to pull together all these different kinds of materials to do your work?
That's a very, it's a tricky question in a way. I think for this specific era of, or this part of his life, we didn't have as much material as we wanted. And so I think what happened was, in this particular section, there was a lot of material that we were able to get a hold of that had recently come from different authors and researchers on Father Capodanno. And but the actual material of him in Taiwan, him in Hong Kong is relatively minor. So I think part of the idea of bringing in footage from Hong Kong that isn't necessarily connected to Father Capodanno, but it is of the period, is to sort of give a sense of the feel of the place. So how do you get inside a person's experience, not only their emotional and their sort of their personal experience, but the context around which they're living, the sort of the context of what it would be like to be part of Maryknoll at that time in a moment of crisis. And so I think that's why we brought in a lot of different elements, pretty much all that we could find. Some of the medical documents we had, there was evidence of these reports, but we didn't actually have the reports. So some of it was we had the actual documents, and some we had to do some recreations with the typewriter, all based upon actual documents that had been material sent to Rome, in fact. So it was that sense of where there were gaps and where the material wasn't readily accessible. We had to be kind of creative to find a way to convey this to the audience. And the editor, Jake Ehrlich, who was a co-producer on the film, did a great job. I think one of the things that he was great at was this layering that you were noticing. So there isn't a lot of room for error, especially in that early part of his life, because it's all sort of leading up to this decision to go to Vietnam. And so there is that sense of movement, the sense of trying to get, even with the music, a sense of this confusion that he may have felt at that time, where his dream of being a Maryknoll priest in Taiwan seemed to have, it wasn't going as he had planned. And there was a real moment of decision, which led him ultimately to Vietnam. So I think all of those elements, consciously and also subconsciously, perhaps in the way we were putting it together, all factored into what I think you just saw there in that little clip.
What I'm so struck by as well is how you, I'm projecting myself into you, trying to imagine what it'd be like to be a documentarist, is that you're both an historian, right? You're finding historical footage or documents, or you're finding things that already exist, but you're also kind of like a portrait photographer, and that you are also going out and you're interviewing people and capturing them, sharing things that they may have shared before, but not quite in this same way. So you're also you're pulling things out from the past, but you're also creating new things for the archive.
It's very true, and I'm very struck by the idea that what is it that film can do that an essay or a book can't do? And it is this, it's in a documentary, I think it really is this, the use of imagery, the use of music, but primarily the use of these on-camera interviews with eyewitnesses. There's something in a facial gesture, there's something in body language that you can describe in a book that, oh, then the author said this and he moved in his chair. But if you see it, one of the things that, I mean, just since you're mentioning this now, one of the things that I felt frustrated with early on was I felt like I couldn't get inside Father Capodanno's experience at first. And I think maybe it was just the way I was looking. I was reading his writings and I wanted to understand more who he was. But then it was in talking to the people who knew him firsthand that then he really came alive to me. And so in the film, I think that's what was special is it's these on-camera interviews, but the responsibility is how do you edit those interviews? I mean, it's really there's so much footage that ends up on on the side because it's a short piece, and so it's deciding how do you fit this person's soundbite next to this person and kind of crafting something. So no, I'm glad that you picked that up. It is something that I think is important, and it's how do you tell the story in a way that fits the medium through which you're trying to tell that story.
Yeah, and with this, it's such a visual kind of medium. This medium, right? It's it would be very boring just to have somebody reading a script kind of for a long period, and so that kind of. But I think that's why this held my attention, for every second of it, because I continued to feel like I was engaged right now with these individuals who you had interviewed, who feel like people who are around me right now. But I was also feeling like I was being access to things that have been unearthed that may not have been seen before.
Yeah.
And I found that very, very engaging.
It's really great. And it's tricky too, especially when you're dealing with history in his early life, for instance, where very few people are still alive who remember those events. And so it is, how do you tell that, how do you tell that story when the people who, are in these photographs are no longer around to tell that story? So there's challenges involved in that. It felt much, in a way, it felt once we got to Vietnam, it felt much easier in a sense because the people we interviewed really could just tell it all, and it was just they were there, and it was as if it was yesterday for them. But the earlier life was a bit more of a challenge because there was a sense that we needed to do more craft. There was more craft involved, I think, in those earlier sections, just given that the materials weren't as plentiful, if that makes sense.
We're really blessed to have Father Mark Bristol with us. Father Bristol is a Brooklyn priest, but is an active duty naval chaplain right now in the same role in many ways that Father Capodanno was, though now in a different era. And we were hoping that Father could speak to us just a little bit about the relationship that develops, or that seems to develop, between a military chaplain and the personnel that he's serving. We've wondered a little in conversation, does that feel similar to the way a parish priest develops a relationship with his parishioners? You know, does a chaplain see the service members that they are with as their parishioners? And I also understand, Father, that your own vocation story is in some intimate ways connected with Father Capodanno's story and with his family. Would you mind sharing a little bit with us about any of those things?
Sure. I'll kind of share a little bit about how my vocation kind of connected with the Capodanno story and his life. I first joined the Navy when I was 17 years old, and I joined right out of high school. And I was stationed aboard a ship called the USS Mount Whitney, and that was based in Gaeta, Italy, which is the town where the Capodanno family was from. At that time, I didn't know anything about Father Capodanno, and we were attending Mass normally on base. There's a base chaplain who's Catholic, who will offer Masses for the Catholic personnel attached to that area. But that base closed down. And so the sailors in that area who were Catholic were forced to either travel about an hour distance to the next town, to the next base, to attend Mass, or to visit the churches locally. I didn't know Italian, but I didn't have the energy to travel an hour just to go to Mass. So I took a Magnificat, a little booklet with me with the readings, and I just followed along. And lo and behold, the couple that was sitting next to me, they were just rambling throughout the Mass, talking to each other. I felt, how rude. And then at the end of Mass, they approached me and they said, "Are you American?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, you must come to our house because we have an American shrine there, and we really love Americans." So it worked out that I was able to visit their home. And as they were showing me images of different ships that have been stationed in Gaeta, Italy, Gaeta's had a long relationship with the U.S. Navy. The USS Constitution was the first ship to pull into there. And at that time, the Pope was in hiding there. So Pope Pius IX was the first Pope to step foot on American soil because he stepped on a U.S. vessel in Gaeta, Italy. And so they showed me all these images of different ships that have been there. And then they showed me an image of this priest. And they said, "This is my cousin, Father Vincent Capodanno, and he's going to be made a saint soon." And I said, "I've never heard of this guy, and thank you." And I just kind of exited out of my mind and just enjoyed the nice hospitality that this Italian family offered me. During that time, after that visit, I was discerning the priesthood. I thought about the priesthood a little bit prior to joining the Navy, and it started resurfacing. I guess living in Rome, living in Italy, and being close to Rome, around everything Catholic, it kind of inspired me to say, maybe I should look into this again. So I went to a discernment retreat sponsored by the Archdiocese for Military Services. So as we have the Diocese of Brooklyn, which is in charge of all the churches in Brooklyn and Queens, the Archdiocese for the Military Services is in charge of all the military services and for providing chaplains to the Catholics that are in the military. So they had a retreat for men in the military discerning the priesthood. And at this retreat, they had a number of books about chaplains. And one of those books was the book titled The Grunt Padre, which is the first biography that was written by Father Capodanno by Father Dan Mode. And so I picked up the book and I said, "Oh, this is interesting." And when I flipped over the cover, it was the exact same photo that I'd seen in that house. And that brought little chills in my spine, because I was like, I was just in this family's house and now I'm at a retreat talking about the priesthood. And it seemed that Capodanno was some way saying, "Mark, you should look into this." And I reported back to the family that they were telling the truth, that their cousin was going to be made a saint, hopefully soon. And then I shared with them that I was at this priestly discernment retreat. And they said, "How wonderful, like, you're going to become a priest, you're going to follow in the footsteps of my cousin." And that support that they offered me really helped me in that discernment, because I didn't come from a Catholic family. I converted to Catholicism when I was 16 years old. So having the support of this family of saying, I believe in you and I believe that God can use you as a priest, inspired me to follow that path. So I left the military, I entered into seminary for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and in 2016, I was ordained a priest for Brooklyn. And then 3 years later, I entered into naval service as a chaplain. So right now, I'm stationed on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which is an aircraft carrier. It is stationed here in San Diego, and it's been all over the news recently. It was a ship that had the coronavirus and the captain fired, and I was there in the thick of it. And just to explain, the ministry of a chaplain is that you're not only just as a parish priest where you're just offering mass on a daily basis, you're responsible for the care of every single sailor on board that ship. And there are 5,000 sailors on board the Theodore Roosevelt. So I'm responsible for the care for them, providing counseling, support, improving the morale, listening to them. I also provide services for the Catholics that are there. About 30% of that crew is Roman Catholic. And so I provide daily mass as well as Sunday masses for them and hear confessions, do baptisms, confirmations, all of that on the ship while at sea. And then also I facilitate for those who are not of the Catholic faith. On the ship, I'm one of 3 chaplains. I'm the priest and 2 others are Protestant ministers. So those of the Muslim faith or those of the Jewish faith or Buddhists, who do they turn to find someone of their own faith tradition? So what I do in facilitating that is that I appoint what is called a lay leader. And so that is someone of the Muslim faith tradition or the Jewish faith tradition, and they get authorization from their local church community to lead those services at sea. Because we're in the middle of the ocean, we can't go to the neighboring church or the neighboring synagogue or mosque. That's all we have. So they lead these services for them, and I help supervise them to help them make sure that those services are being run well and that the people on board the ship are able to receive the care that they need. And then lastly, I serve as an advisor to the commanding officer and to its leaders on issues of ethics and morale. And I saw that play a big role while I was on the ship during the coronavirus, and advocating for sailors who were sick and saying, hey, the sailor needs more medicine, or we may need to change a diet for this sailor so that they can be able to get well as quickly as possible. So the chaplains kind of were the hands on the ground, visiting the sick and offering that feedback to the commanding officer that he can be able to provide those sailors the care that they needed. So chaplains in the Navy, they serve both the Navy and the Marines. So Father Capodanno, he was assigned to a Marine unit as opposed to a Navy unit. And that's the kind of path that I follow, is that my first assignment now is with a Navy ship, but in a few years, I'll be assigned to a Marine unit, and I'll be serving with the Marines as well. The Marines also rely on the Navy for their medical staff as well. Their docs are actual naval officers. So the chaplain and the doc, they kind of work close together. And that's what was the unit that Father Capodanno was assigned to. He was assigned to the medical battalion, where he assisted the doctors in caring for the sick and also caring for the grunts, those Marines who were under his care as well.
Father, what a fascinating story. That's, you know, and that kind of, I think that kind of connection and that kind of real, I mean, I won't call it a miracle, Capodanno's miracle to get you into the priesthood, but it certainly was a great blessing. And I mean, I think as his cause continues, I mean, that what a wonderful testimonial that you can give. So glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that with us and being generous enough to do that.
Yeah, definitely played a big role in my life. And yes, I would say his miracle was me getting ordained a priest. And in Thanksgiving for that, my first mass that I celebrated, the family granted me the permission to use his chalice, his actual chalice, for my very first mass. And that was a great honor to know that my first celebration of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass had a connection to him, and that he would continue to inspire my ministry as a priest in the Diocese of Brooklyn and in the United States Navy.
Yeah. What a great blessing. Thank you, Father.
One of the other things that's great about Father Bristol is that I discovered Father through the family on Staten Island, who have really, Father Bristol's kind of become the family priest almost over there. Like, post on social media all the time, just rooting for him. So it's really it's kind of special how you really have walked in Father Capodanno's footsteps, and what you mean not only to the sailors you work with, but also to Father Capodanno's family. I think that's very special.
Tim, let's build a little bit on what Father Bristol just shared with us about this relationship between the Marine Corps. Happy birthday, Marine Corps! Today, the Marine Corps using naval chaplains and corpsmen and medics, sort of because that's kind of the tradition. We started this off by kind of just locating a sort of moment in Father Capodanno's life. This moment of he doesn't know what he's doing. He's not happy. He's dissatisfied. And in the midst of that kind of and his mother has just died. And there's a sort of suffering that's kind of that must be part of his, just his personal life, his spiritual life. And out of that comes this opportunity, this decision to become a naval chaplain. And that leads to obviously very heroic ministry. There's this other kind of tension, though, in him too, and I imagine that it must be part of in the life of any chaplain, of how he's in the midst of war, right? So he's a priest, he's a chaplain on a battlefield, and but he's not happy about war. But he's there because there are service members who need spiritual care, and maybe in a sense need it even more than just the average ordinary civilian back at home, because they're on the battlefield making decisions that are very difficult and in great danger. And medical staff, battlefield medical staff, are the same thing. They're there to heal the wounded. Corpsmen and battlefield medics, they care for anyone who's wounded. The barriers of who's the enemy, who's not the enemy kind of disappear. And it's this sense of, in Capodanno's life, of having to accept all of the ambiguity and the gray areas that seem, from his biography, where he's described by his family members and friends as being very buttoned up, always dressed very well, being very kind of stern, loving, but kind of stern. But he's able to survive spiritually and grow spiritually in the midst of all this. I quoted in one thing I wrote many years ago, something that I got from the Grunt Padre, which was kind of my introduction to him. And Tim, you had mentioned in a conversation that we don't really have a lot of documents from Capodanno, right? He didn't write a lot of letters, but apparently they do have journals in which he wrote sermon notes, which were never complete sermons. They were just ideas that must have been like the thread that he was following in preaching a sermon. And here's one of them. This comes from one of his journals. Easily made decisions, dash. Take on new depth, dash. Only black and white, dash. Take on new depth, dash. Recognize large gray area where we do most of our living, dash. Most of our groping, period. I'm imagining that's the outline of a sermon that he may have given, in real life, where there's this letting go of the certainty of what's going to be black and white, what's going to be absolutely certain, into the reality of, no, we live in gray areas. We live with the struggle of trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. Tim, in your kind of engagement with his biography, has your own set of ideas changed perhaps about how one lives that kind of life? Is the battlefield a metaphor for anybody's life, in one sense, that we're all struggling somehow with things that are coming at us, and we need to kind of turn our attention to the person who's in need, or to what the right thing to do is? Any sense of that from your experience with this?
There was one of the people we interviewed who, and this is in the film, Jim Hempfeld. He spoke about how difficult it was when you would see your friends killed, and and then you would capture the enemy. And the human sort of knee-jerk response is revenge, because this out of this battle, your best friend was killed out of this. And he said that Father Capodanno told them, one of the things he told them was to be careful to not lose your humanity. And I remember that very much. And the way he said it too, you could just tell that when you're in, I mean, I've never been battle. I'm not a veteran. And so I can only speak of this as somebody who's interviewed people. So I don't know what it's like to be in the middle of something like that. But I think there is a sense that in the midst of that chaos, in the midst of the fear, in the midst of the desire for revenge, things happen. Things have happened throughout history. And I think, I mean, I suppose it's analogous in terms of when we're suffering traumas and chaos, but how we want to respond to those circumstances. But yet I think it's something like Father Capodanno, who was seeing the worst of the worst day after day, going on all of the operations with the men, and seeing just the death and the sorrow. His aide and bodyguard was a man named Henry Hernandez, who spoke about seeing him on numerous occasions writing letters home and weeping. But yet in the midst of that, not despairing and not growing, in not losing hope. I think he was, I think in the midst of the grayness, he had a profound faith in the ultimate things, in the eternal life. I mean, it's very clear in his writings, and it's very clear in the way he spoke to the men, that there was a deep, deep sense that this wasn't, that there was something beyond this experience that they were having, that there was a heaven. So I think, yeah, I mean, in my understanding of Father Capodanno, I see him as having just a tremendous faith that provided these very, a lot of very scared young men, 18, 19 years old, a place, somewhere to turn, because I think the Vietnam War for a lot of these guys was it was a terrifying experience. And to have a guy who was older than them, he was in his mid to late 30s by then, as a father figure who provided this sense of comfort and stability in the midst of pure, an earthquake happening every day, I think was remarkable. And it made me wonder too. I mean, I don't know how I would respond in a situation like that, So that's, I mean, I think there's something there about Father Capodanno's deep, deep sense of faith. And Father Bristol, I mean, I think that, does that sound true to you in terms of your reading of him?
Definitely. As you know, a military chaplain is a non-combatant. So joining the military as a chaplain is not in a sense that I'm there to engage in war. I'm there to provide spiritual care to these sailors and Marines. And we follow the principle of just war. And the more important principle that the chaplain provides is that principle called jus in bello. And that's how we fight the war. Do we fight the war with anger and revenge? Do we fight the war doing illegal things by indiscriminately firing your weapon? Or do you fight the war in self-defense? And that's what a Marine and a sailor needs to be reminded of, so that they don't lose their humanity, is that we're there for self-defense. Because in that situation, I haven't been in war myself, but from my experience of being deployed, you form a family with the people that you live and work with, because you're with them 24/7. You eat with them, you sleep with them in the same area. You're taking a shower and then standing in line. You're talking about life. Those people become your lifelong brothers. And what you're there is, yes, we are defending the United States, but more importantly, you're defending your friend next to you, and that you want to make sure that he gets home alive. So that's what inspires these men to fight well. But also they need to be reminded that they can't let that turn their hearts cold into revenge, and to see the enemy as a non-human, to see them as a human as well, but know that you're there to defend life, to protect your loved ones, which are your fellow Marines.
There was a statistic about chaplains in World War II, and a very different kind of war situation than Korea, than Vietnam, but it was interesting to me. Someone had done a kind of statistical study about the most dangerous roles that you could have in World War II in the American military across all services in all places. And they discovered that the most dangerous in the sense that the highest proportionality of being killed in action were for sailors who were manning these tiny little supply ships in the Pacific theater. They weren't heavily armed. They weren't very large. They would take supplies between the larger ships. And it was known that they weren't armed and that you could pick them off very easily. And that if you did, supplies wouldn't get to the various places they needed to go to. So if you were a sailor on one of those ships, it was very, very likely that you would not survive the war. The second highest proportional danger was among not just chaplains, but Catholic chaplains in World War II. And the person who was doing the research for it, his theory was twofold. One, he had a sense that for Catholic chaplains in particular, and of course, every religious tradition has a respect for people who are dying, but for Catholic chaplains in particular, we have this sort of sacramental life of the benefit of being able to give absolution and to anoint someone who's there. So there's already built into Catholic ritual life, there is this desire to be with someone who is really literally at life's end. But then the other part of it was just wondering if, because all the chaplains were unmarried, didn't have family at home, didn't have spouses and children, that, unlike probably many of the Protestant chaplains or Jewish chaplains would, most likely, that there was a sense of either freedom or detachment from what they were walking into. We get this sense from Capodanno's biography. We're told, in the documentary, that he's being scolded by superiors because he's just walking right into stuff. He's not supposed to go there out in the front. He's supposed to hold back, but he doesn't. He goes in. He comes home after being deployed for a while in Vietnam, and is again just wanting to go back. He just wants to go back, right? So there's this, and I guess that's sort of my curiosity about this relationship that develops in particular, not just amongst chaplains, but with Catholic priests who are chaplains, because of what might be this really a profound emotional investment in the people that you're serving. Because, Father, as you said, they quite literally become your family, because you don't have an earthly family in that same sense. They are your family. I was really struck by that. When we got into that bit in the documentary, it made me very sad to think that Capodanno would come home to this large, boisterous Italian family, in Staten Island, and God, why wouldn't he want to be there with all of them? But then I sort of realized, no, I think he had his attachment, his emotional attachment at that moment in his life was amongst the Marines that he was serving with, and of course he wanted to be there just as much as if his wife had been there or his kids had been there. He really wanted to be with his family.
I think that's absolutely true, and that's both his family on Staten Island recognized that, and so too did the Marines we spoke with. I think that something that's interesting about Father Capodanno is that, I think that the men picked up, is that he actually wanted to be there with them. It wasn't like, oh, I have to do this thing out of a duty. It was he wanted to be there with them. So it's not just a cold, it's not just cold duty that this is what we ought to do. What's interesting about him as well is his past. And you had mentioned this briefly, but he was in a way reassigned from Taiwan because his superiors thought he really wasn't up to the task. That was one of the quotes from his superiors, that he didn't have the rough and tumble attitude. And one of his classmates had mentioned that, again, that he enjoyed having his clothes very clean. And so the idea that then he would become the grunt padre with with the men in these really difficult situations shows, I think, what that love, a priestly love, I think, where he wanted to be with the men in wherever they would go. And that propelled him out to go on these operations as well, which were very dangerous. But if he was going to have his family, these men who were dying on the battlefield, that's where they needed him most. And so that, for him, that was I think the logic of the ethic, that he had to go there. He wanted to be there with them. So, and I think it's really interesting that in a way is something unique to what a priest can be, because the loyalties to the natural family aren't there. That's exactly where a husband would be with his wife or his child. It would be at the hospital bedside or wherever they were, to go and be where they're most needed. So that to me was very, very powerful in learning about Father Capodanno, especially in the midst of negative stories about the priesthood recently. It was something where it's like, oh, this is where it really where it shows itself of what it can mean and what it can be. I'm curious too because this has been, how long for Father Bristol? Has it been 1 year or that you've been the chaplain?
Yes.
Do you feel that in yourself? Is that something that that kind of love for the people you're serving? Is that yeah?
Yes, I've been 1 year a chaplain and 1 year serving aboard this aircraft carrier, and definitely it's the love of the people. We have what is called a medical emergency that happens very often, and first instinct is kind of get out of the way, but then it says, if there's a medical emergency, then I need to be there because it may be a life death situation. So as a priest, I carry my oils on me at all times. And my stole, there to respond, that if that emergency is a life and death situation, that person does have the sacraments and be able to have eternal life if the worst case scenario does happen. And I actually did have that experience on board my ship. A young man had a heart attack, and I was able to be there at the right time to anoint him. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. We flew him off the ship to a nearby hospital, and he didn't survive. And I mourned that. But the one consolation that I did have was that I was able to write a letter to his spouse and say, I was able to give him final absolution and forgive him of all his sins, and that he died, and that you can have peace knowing that he is experiencing eternal life because a priest was there to provide that sacrament to him.
Joel, I have a question for you in terms of the work you've done with EMTs and in specifically with PTSD. And I know that you've written on that and the role of this kind of ministry, which I think there are a lot of parallels when you are faced with these extremes of life, be them extremes of a battlefield or the extremes of a car crash scene. So I'm curious, in terms of your own work with EMTs and ministry to them, are there things that that strike you in Capodanno's life that are parallel to what you've encountered with some of these people?
Actually, that I gravitated so much to those sketched lines of his sermon notes, because that was precisely what I was learning from my friends who were EMTs and paramedics in the fire department and in some hospital-based agencies here in New York City. That life and death moments very, very often, but having to acknowledge them as gray moral areas very often. You have rules, protocols, procedures, expectations, operating guides, all those kinds of things, but all the rules in the world cannot be completely applied to the situation right in front of you, because the rule has not been written yet for that exact situation. You have to apply it. That's the role of the moral agent right there. And when you have the burden, when you're an EMT or paramedic, even in a civilian situation, and you have the burden of this person's life literally in your hands, and depending on what you do or don't do in the next 20 minutes, they may live or die. When it doesn't work well, you carry that with you to the next job, to the next day, to the next week, to the next month. And then that's where the experience of trauma and PTSD perhaps sort of comes in. I always found never being in the military myself, but having friends who are or have been, I've always found those connections to be very, very strong. The other thing that's very strong about it, and I'm sort of struck by this too. We're talking about the life of a priest who was killed in ministering, being priestly on the battlefield. We very similar in New York City on September 11th. Father Michael Judge, Franciscan friar, killed as a fire department chaplain, by all accounts, ministering to a firefighter who was there, and was notated as the first official death of that event in New York City, which in fact was extremely consoling for fire department personnel and many other people to think that Father Judge would be welcoming them into whatever the next journey of their life was, an eternal life. But the same thing. It's working in a first responder way, whether you're law enforcement or EMS or fire department, firefighter kind of capacity. The soldier goes to battle and is changed and then feels kind of uncomfortable coming back to the normal. The EMT, the cop, the firefighter, though working within a local environment, also is changed because of the job, and it's difficult to come back. Because even if you're working and responding in your own neighborhood, you're seeing your neighborhood in a completely different way for the 8 hours, the 12 hours that you're on the job. You're living in a kind of slightly alternate universe in the same space. So in that work, something that we've learned from the military is that helping people to engage with their memories of these things that have happened, helping people to reframe and restructure their understanding of the good and the bad that they were part of, or that they witnessed, or that happened to them, is crucial to coming out of this whole and healthy in some way. It is very similar.
It's interesting. There was a Catholic deacon. His name was Deacon Black Bear. He lives in the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, and he was talking a little bit. His son was a veteran, and I think he was as well, and was talking about the old tradition they had when men would go to war. Before they could come back into society, they had to go through a kind of ritual. They had to go to the sweat, and in fact they couldn't go back to. It would taint society or taint the community until they went through these rituals, kind of a purification, and they would tell the older men what they saw and what they did, and then they could come back to the community. And he was somebody very rooted. He's a fluent Lakota speaker, but also a Catholic deacon. Talked about how the Catholic rituals could be that way, could be that as well for people coming back from these traumatic experiences. And I wonder if in our society, the secular society we live in, where everything has become perhaps a bit horizontal in the way we look at this, if that is part of the issue we see with people coming back from war, not having a ritual way to, as Father Bristol was saying, to confess the sins and to be purified and know that you are whole again, and then be able to come back to society. Yeah. So it's something I always thought about, and Father Capodanno being out there with the guys who were doing this and helping them. Being not just a therapist, as important as therapy is, which I'm a huge advocate, but also the spiritual dimension as well being addressed.
It's also an issue of time, and I think it may be more challenging these days, where we all collectively seem to have less attention spans. There's a fascinating book, Father Bristol. If you haven't read it, you might be interested in it. I don't remember the author. The title of the book is called On Killing. Lovely title, but. A retired Army officer, I believe, and also military historian, writing about the sort of personal effects on military personnel in this experience. And he talks about the difference in what we would call mental health outcomes post-Vietnam and post-British military during the Falkland War. Vietnam, right, happens, and after if you're a sailor, a Marine, a soldier in Vietnam, once your year is up or whatever, boom, 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 you're out, you're helicoptered out, you're flown back to the United States. Within 2 days, you're back in Boise, Idaho, wherever it is that you're from. and how can your mind possibly deal with that transition? The Brits, after Falkland War, deliberately transported all their soldiers back by ship. They could have flown them very easily. They did it by ship. And in the week or so that it took to get from the Falkland Islands back to Britain, there was this natural transition that happened among the personnel, amongst each other, just naturally taking this time to get back to quote unquote normal life, so that they just sort of discovered much lower rates of mental distress and emotional distress and spiritual distress because of the time that they gave the personnel to transition back to their normal lives. But of course, we with iPhones and cell phones, and we want things to happen right away. And so there's also a kind of element of patience that's necessary, and just an acknowledgement that human beings need time to transition from one important thing to the next.
Well, the same way the body needs time to heal a wound, the sense of allowing the psyche and the soul to heal. I mean, I think that absolutely requires time, and I think, yeah, I think that's amazing. Just that week or two of time can provide that with a community of people that have gone through the same thing, and then have a transitional kind of period. Yeah.
Dr. Egler, I'm not seeing any questions from any participants.
There is actually a question in the box, and I have a feeling this might probably be primarily directed to Tim, but let's see. In the film, there was a story of Father Capodanno giving out St. Christopher medals. And when he got to the last Marine, there were none left. So Father took off his own medal and gave it to the man who still has it today. Was that man interviewed for the film?
No, we could not get him on camera. Now, the question is, there's another film called and Chosen, and whether he may be in that film, I'm not sure, but we had tried and failed. But yes, it was, he still held on to that medal, and a lot of the Marines we spoke to, yeah, mentioned that specifically. So unfortunately, it would have been nice to get his story.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe because I'm not sure if everybody actually had the opportunity to watch the film, but maybe Tim, would you mind just kind of explaining a little bit about that particular
Sure.
part of the documentary?
Sure. Well, so Father Capodanno served a tour in Vietnam, and then he requested to come back. So he was sent back for his second tour, and he was sent to the Khe Sanh Valley, which was one of the most intense, some of the most intense fighting in the whole war took place in the Khe Sanh Valley. And in the actual day that he died, it was during an operation called Operation Swift, and there was a company of Marines that was ambushed by the North Vietnamese army. It was a total ambush, and so they called in reinforcements. And Father Capodanno, there's all sorts of details in terms of the different companies, but the short of it is Father Capodanno jumped on the last helicopter into this fight. And we interviewed the company commander, who said that he was not aware that Father Capodanno had jumped on the helicopter, and had he known, he would have said no, but he did. And so they then were not able to land in the precise spot that they needed to offer help for this one company. So they had to march in. And as Father Capodanno was with his company, they too were ambushed. And in the midst of this ambush, he was going from Marine to Marine, offering last rites, pulling the wounded to safety. And in the course of that, he was shot by a machine gun and passed away just as he was, they think, giving last rites to one of the Marines. And in the course of that too, there was different stories of one of the Marines had misplaced his gas mask. So with they would drop, and Father Bristol could explain this better than I would. They would try to create sort of a diversion through dropping. It wasn't actually gas, but it was trying to make the Vietnamese think it was gas, and so they would use their gas masks. But Father Capodanno offered his mask to a man who had lost his, and he pulled the radio operator sort of to safety who had been shot. And so it was a kind of a remarkable thing, and it was for this battle that he actually won the Medal of Honor. And there's some dispute of how many times he was shot with the machine gun, but the real point of it is that he had really, in the midst of this firefight, just selflessly given himself to these guys. And what was really powerful, I thought, was talking to some of the men about the moment they heard that he had died. It was as if the world sort of stopped for them. Henry Hernandez, again, who had been with him during his first tour as his aide and bodyguard, they were all just speechless. It was like losing their father. So it was a really remarkable thing. And many of the guys said, there was one in particular said that he thinks about him every single day. And and he had a few encounters with him, but it was to be, he's now in his mid-70s, and this is somebody, he says when he goes to heaven, it's the first person he wants to meet. It's a remarkable thing. So yeah, it's and that's what I mean in terms of getting to know him through these guys who served with him. Its letters are phenomenal and all that, but then you just see it in the way their eyes and the way they light up when they talk about it. It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, the unique thing about a military chaplain as opposed to a parish priest is that you live with your parishioners. You're with them 24/7. The parish priest, he says mass and he goes back to the rectory and everyone goes back home. But your parishioners are with you at the lunch table. They're with you as they're watching a game on the football game on TV. They're in your day-to-day life. And what a chaplain offers is what is called ministry of presence. And that's what's unique with ministry with the Marines, is that the Marines want the chaplain to be present to them. If he's not present, they don't trust him. So if the Marines are going for a 50-mile hump marching, the chaplain needs to be there with them. They don't expect the chaplain to be as physically fit as them, but just knowing that the chaps is with them gives them assurance that everything's going to be all right. So it definitely was demoralizing for Capodanno to be killed because they're like, this was our presence of God with us, and it's been taken from us. And also, what Father Capodanno was doing was very unorthodox. It is not the process of a chaplain to go out in a dangerous mission like that. And that's why that commanding officer was unaware and said, no way would you be coming with us, because the chaplain will be a distraction. Everyone will be concerned about protecting him because he's a non-combatant, instead of engaging the enemy. So the chaplain normally would have stayed with the hospital ward so that he can be able to minister to the wounded. But Father Capodanno, he felt called to do something different, like he wanted to be there in the thick of it. But again, he was seeking to provide that ministry of presence.
Would you say now, and Father Bristol, that policies that wouldn't necessarily be possible in today's day? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Your supervisor would not allow you to be out there on the front lines with them. And the Marines wouldn't want it either. It's, again, you're not armed. So it's important that you be able to fight back just as much as them, and that they're not worried or concerned about protecting you. They're more concerned about engaging the enemy.
I think we're kind of getting to the end of our time. There was a question in the Q&A, but from another person attending, but I think, Tim, you responded to that. It was a question about specifically how Father Capodanno was killed. I I've got to say, I've just really enjoyed this conversation. Tim, you and I have had a number of chances to chat a little bit. I've enjoyed this as much, if not more, than the other conversations. And Father Bristol, I just absolutely really enjoyed getting to see you and to hear about your experiences. You've added so much to this by providing just sort of a real context and an example of someone who is doing this work in your own way right now. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service in that way.
And I just want to echo thanks. Thank all three of you. One of the words that just keeps resonating with me from the moment Father Bristol started speaking was the word providence. This idea, you know, when you entered the home of that family in Italy and met Father Capodanno there, and then how you carried him through, and he, you know, I get goosebumps because I believe he really was instrumental in your vocation, and that's not a coincidence. It is providence, and that deep faith that you clearly carry, and that so many of these men and so many assembled in this room, I believe, carry. We talk about, you know, the sacrifices and service to others, and people like Father Capodanno come to mind. And I really believe, and those of you who know me know I can't not say something about St. Francis at this moment, but it really kind of, what resonates with me is this Franciscan perspective that this invitation to service and self-sacrifice reflects that is the reason why God created us, out of an abundance of love. And that abundance of love is an invitation to be in relationship with one another and to share of oneself. And again, I don't know if I could share of myself that deeply where I would sacrifice my life for someone else, but it really is a testament to what God is inviting us to do. And I think as it continues in a forum like this. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Warden, Father Bristol, and Mr. Moriarty, for just being with us tonight, and thanking everybody who joined us. And if you haven't seen the film, I think it is going on right now at 7 o'clock on Net TV. I saw on the schedule, but it's also on Amazon Prime. So thank you all so very much. I think this was a wonderful way to celebrate the Marine Corps' birthday.
Indeed.
In honor of Father Capodanno.
Thank you both very much, and thanks for the St. Francis community. It's great to talk about this, and it's good to see Father Bristol again as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And continue to keep our troops in your prayers.
Will do.
We shall. All right. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a happy and safe evening in whatever you're doing. Thank you again for being with us tonight.